That means all these sophisticated technologies must be developed. Since we do not have natural resources, also the reason, so we really should be quite intelligent in doing business. And frankly, this is the case. I believe we're really trying to do our best in some areas. And just to mention, 10% of scientific lasers production in the world coming from Lithuania. This is really kind of world stage. If we are reminding to each of us and also to somebody else that we have one of the fastest public internets in the world, also quite important and impressive, especially it's felt when we are visiting foreign countries. And it has to do also consequently with the blockchain, fintech, and other so to say technologies, which is also can be considered as a leaders, at least in Europe, definitely. And it's recognized leadership. It's not something we are trying to do artificially, but this is really natural going. At the same time, artificial intelligence still an unknown field, still to be developed, explored. Time will come and artificial intelligence will replace a big part of bureaucracy. I do not believe they will replace politicians, although I don't know. But in democracy, maybe it shouldn't be like that. Anyway, it really optimizes our life. And maybe it's becoming a tool also in international relations. It's not yet explored, not yet known how it should be done. At the same time, it's also not by accident, $150 billion China allocating for artificial intelligence. Very ambitious program just provided by United States. And since I said Lithuania also quite ambitious country, in March this year we also launched quite ambitious artificial intelligence program. Also, it's not by accident. We have Ambassador at Large sitting here in the first row, Evaldas, who is dealing with artificial intelligence in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As far as I know, since I know not every Ministry of Foreign Affairs in European Union, they do have this kind of responsibility. Well, but you can allocate, you can appoint somebody. It's not solving the problems by itself. Definitely we should look at that very intensively, share best practices, best solutions. It's artificial intelligence, but we shouldn't do that artificially. It should be done naturally. At the same time, it's already used not only by governmental sector, but let me mention one example. What we are advertising, I am doing that at least everywhere when I can. It's about counter propaganda. It's about fighting with fake news. And our NGOs, media, volunteers, elves, also artificial intelligence, they're using for the platform debunk.eu. And as you probably know, many of you, if not, I can just remind that they are really debunking fake news, 10,000 articles per day in Lithuanian, English, Russian, in the real time, and it works. And those on the other side really should readjust, really should change tactics and to be smarter, which is possible, but not so easy. And we shouldn't make their lives also easier. So this is already used by us, by government, by so to say institutions, but also NGOs, which is much more valuable. Anyway, I'm really happy that we included this agenda item into the discussion. So I'm leaving you in good mood. I have to leave you, but leaving you also in the good mood and also in good hands of Thomas, who will share with you his experience. You still belong to our team or already departed? You'll be back, yes? You don't know. You never left. Okay, so thank you very much and have a nice discussion. Thank you.
Okay, dear Minister, while the Minister is still here, Excellencies, guests, colleagues and very dear friends, well, it's a privilege to be here today, and of course I'm nervous and excited to start the session. I will make the introduction of the session a little bit later, but we have another guest, and I want to invite Audriaus Zujaus, the founder of the Lithuanian AI community and the CEO of Resi Labs, to give his initial remarks. Audriaus.
Thanks, Thomas. Hello, everyone. My name is Audriaus, and as you see today, I stand before you, and I want to talk about times that are different. There are a few things that are different that are coming, and this is the reason I chose not to wear a suit today. to make a little bit of a difference by talking about the future and what's coming. So, most of you are diplomats, working and doing important missions in the world. But at the same time, there are very interesting things happening in the background. We talk about artificial intelligence as if it's a miracle that's going to save everyone or doom everyone. But the truth is, the start of this is actually way before most of us. Most of the methods we use in artificial intelligence have been discovered in the 1970s. So why now? Why now do we feel threatened or inspired by this topic? And the reason for that is the ever-evolving computer industry, the industry of data, and the tech industry. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, my message is this: don't forget everything else that surrounds it. We talk about robots and computers becoming aware, but this is not what's important. What's important is automation, good UX, good user experience when using computer products, and ability to collect data and use it ethically. I think the challenges we're all going to face in the next 15 years is, how do we as Europe, how do we as Lithuania compete with countries like China, who are putting all this automation effort, artificial intelligence, in the hands of their regimes that allow them to very effectively do what they want to do? How do we do this ethically and not fall behind? And I think that's the most interesting question, especially for your audience. You represent us, and you represent other countries, and you have to deal with this daily. So my takeaway message is this: don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and find out what we're really talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And this is part of what our mission is about, this Lithuanian Association of Artificial Intelligence. It's to educate everyone, to remove the shadows and clouds from this mysterious word, and to show for what it really is, and an effective technological means to an end. But you're here to decide what that end is. We can provide the means. So I wish everyone a fruitful discussion, and thank you for inviting me here.
Okay, thank you, Audriaus. I think that already sets our further discussions a little bit, but I will continue on that note. So, internet has become the most important infrastructure of the 21st century. There are 4 billion connected users at computer mouse click distance. Computational power has grown to the levels that actually allow technology like artificial intelligence to be omnipresent. In your smart devices, there's actually more computational power than the first spacecraft had. And no wonder and no surprise that businesses were very quick to grab this opportunity and actually fight for the attention of the global user. But so do governments. They look to build up their digital power and actually to project it abroad, let alone just defend their economical interest or regulate the industry. And when we have in mind governments, there's immediately space and demand for diplomacy. And with this introduction, I would like to invite the wonderful panel to take the floor. Elijus Čivilis is Vice Minister of Lithuania, Vice Minister of Economics and Innovations, and he is the Chief Information Officer in charge of digital economy and society. Ms. Eline Chivot, Senior Policy Analyst at the Center of Data Innovation in Brussels. Welcome, Eline. Eline focuses on European technology policy issues and how policymakers can promote digital innovation in EU. Mr. Arnaud Gaspart, a career diplomat from the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he focuses on data analysis for business purposes. Welcome, Arnaud. And Ossi Piironen from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Policy Planning and Research, and his interests include politics of quantification, governments and governmentality. Yes, governmentality. Even the artificial intelligence had difficulty to actually see the correct spelling of the word. And theories of democracy. Our session will run in 3 parts, actually. During the first part, I will invite the panelists to give their initial remarks or introductory presentations on the topic. Then I will ask some 5 questions during our second part of this panel. And third, we will go to the audience for questions. So get your questions ready and wave, get my attention. And with that, and I need also to say that this session is going live on Facebook. So this is a public debate. With this, I open the floor, and Elijus, you are invited to start the discussion. You can take the stand or go ahead from your seat. I will switch to your presentation.
Okay, so guys, since this was my most wanted event this year, and that's thanks to Evaldas and Skirmante, who were, making me so much focused on having this opportunity to talk to the Lithuanians that represent Lithuania more than we do here locally. So guys, for this reason, I actually made few slides. I wanted to make it a huge presentation, but I'll fix it into 10 minutes. So you most probably have heard about this AI, which is going to impact the world economy significantly. And Lithuania being one of the most fragile countries in the group of the OECD countries for the automation, right? So on one hand, this is a huge opportunity, but then it's also a big treat. But, honestly, this is nothing new what we have been living for. We've seen those transformations happening in the past. And if we look to the this World Economic Forum, it says that every single technology that's eliminate one of the jobs, it creates 5 new jobs. So if you think of the automotive industry, this is exactly what happened. The guys who were carrying all the horses, they were super afraid, but then we have a whole big industry, right? So, but this is not about, scaring and making everyone freaking out. And this is what I really hate in the international conversation. This is about the job loss and ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. So every time I want, to demystify what it is, right? I mean, because you feel like in the fog. Everyone is saying AI, but what exactly it is, right? So I would start with this, generic question. If the picture you see here is AI, and honestly, guys, this is not AI. This is just a robot. And most probably this is a stupid robot because it does not exhibit anything intelligence. So in this country, then we started this conversation around this topic. Firstly, we tried to define what it is. So we came up with this definition, which basically says that AI is not, a one entity or one device or one instrument. This is basically a set of different algorithms that can make, some kind of autonomous decisions. And as Mr. Zujaus was telling, this is something has been happening for many, many years in the past. It's just that now we picked it up as a mainstream topic because of several reasons. Firstly, because the algorithms, they became available publicly online, and it's not locked in the research institutions. So in other words, yourself, you can go into those websites and find the algorithms where you can build products. Secondly, we have enough computing power and data that are able, to make it commercially or practically applied. So in other words, AI is not a robot. It's just an algorithm that might be used, to control some hardware, right? So, and normally this is not just one function. These might be several functions that come together and make this device or this hardware to look like intelligent. All right, so here in Lithuania, we just took the baby steps on this topic. And honestly, I mean, in public sector, we had this big problem where we are always certain what we do, but honestly, this is not how big discoveries happens. This is about curiosity and, exploration and taking the path. It's not about saying that we exactly know what is going to be in the future. And so our strategy that has been released back in February, it's just, first steps, and it doesn't say, exactly how to get and how to make the unicorn out of this country, but this is rather recommendation, what are the best next areas to focus on, and then how we proceed further. So in this report, I recommend you downloading it and reading it because it also says a little bit about what's happening in Lithuania. So it's not that we started from zero. We have 7 universities that have some programs linked to this. We have 100 researchers that do AI type of research, but unfortunately we still do not have any dedicated programs or research centers on this field. Secondly, we have quite healthy business ecosystem. We have quite many Lithuanian companies that work with those type of algorithms, but also we have foreign capital companies that run here. In altogether, this being also funded, in the past it was more accidentally, but now it's actually on purpose, focused, to foster those new businesses. And over the last 3 years, we've invested around 26 million as a government into those type of projects, but also venture capital did their part as well. And we have a vibrant community in Lithuania where we see up to 1,500 people that come into the events, and those events are run by the minister that was in front of you. We also have around up to 500 engineers that actually work on the field. So altogether, if I will summarize this strategy that we are setting, so firstly is that we have to understand that we're not isolated and we are in EU, we are in a global market, and we have to understand our position. And most probably we won't be competing with China or US on the algorithm development, but on the application and specialization, this is what we can do. Secondly, this is not exclusively into one sector like healthcare or media. It's actually all the sectors will be impacted. And thirdly, it's all about skills and competences, because as Andrews was telling, it's not about the software itself, but it's about the surrounding, how it's changing our society and the process around it. And finally, we have to be more specific and more focused on our academic side, and we are absolutely in line what EU is going to, and it's about the data use, and this is something we also have to learn as a country because we're failing here a lot. And finally, the ethical side, this is a full commitment from this country to comply with EU directions. So, all in all, how do we get there? Because it looks like a big journey, but it has started already, and just for your reference, we have a digital Lithuanian meetups where exactly in the same format we invite academia, business and public sector, where we do not sell to each other different products, but we rather discuss how this country should look like. We've had already 6 meetups like this, and this continues every second month. by the way, the next meetup is going to be around the RPA, which is about the automation of the business processes. We do have a GovTech forum, and this is a dedicated educational community for the public servants. So basically, everyone who works for the public sector, they're invited to learn on the new technologies. And this is not a formal, where we push people to read books, but we rather discuss on those technologies like AI and how they will impact, and just learning, the basics on how to distinguish, machine learning algorithms, how they are specific and so on. And finally, believe it or not, we are the first country in EU where we had a parliament members learning machine learning course, and this has happened last week on Friday. So basically, the parliament members got back to school and they learned, again, not the marketing slides, but the actual, machine learning basics on how it works and what it is. And this helps to demystify, right? It's not about, changing the world and now the dominance of the evil or the good will happen, but this is basically knowing how it works. And finally, we have just launched the GovTech Lab, and this is the basically a laboratory that allows the startups to offer their solutions to the public sector much faster than a traditional public procurement way. So we are posting the real life challenges that we face in the public sector, and then the startups are proposing their early stage solution and products that we can develop. And this is also very much focused on AI solutions being introduced to the public sector. So for the final remark, I just want to use one of the greatest explanation of our legend, and this is done by one of our community members who basically looked at our Iron Wolf and he said, hey, this is exactly the moment of this country to flourish because this has been, hard-coded into our legend, and now we will be having this great sound that goes wide and far of the future land of artificial intelligence. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Elijus, for a very energizing start. I wish now to invite Eline to give her presentation. Here it is on the screen.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you. Yes, and thank you, Excellencies and honorable guests, for having me today. It's a huge honor to be here. I have slides as well. Less fun pictures, but I have pictures too. So just very briefly, I am speaking today on behalf of the Center for Data Innovation. We're a think tank based in Brussels and DC, and in Brussels in particular, we indeed cover how public policy affects the emergence of technologies and the competitiveness of the European Union. Today I'll go over some of the challenges of digital transformation, what does that mean for diplomacy and the realities of that shift, and then moving to the opportunities that this represents, as well as some of the concerns and some of the solutions moving forward for foreign policy and diplomats. When I told a couple of friends and colleagues back in Brussels that I was going to talk about AI and diplomacy in Lithuania, they told me, but what are you going to talk about? Not a lot of people see the connections between those two topics, yet there is a lot to say about it. So without further ado, why are we talking about it? Why does it matter to talk about it? I didn't use it. Yes, I did. We're in a world that has no glue, and digitalization has been disrupting power, ideas, flattening out borders, and there's a lot of information at an unprecedented volume that's flowing around. Maybe 20 years ago, there was no internet in the offices. You would have access to information about a country's particular situation through diplomatic telegrams. But now all the world's information is basically out there, available just a few clicks away. And there's also the emergence of new topics like cybersecurity on the agenda of foreign policymakers and diplomats. And it's difficult to talk about AI diplomacy without mentioning the role of technology companies that are, they've been throwing their weight around, refusing to, for instance, work with gun sellers or shutting down their services in countries where abortion is being threatened as a fundamental right. So that's Netflix, for instance. But it's also important to talk about them because they carry a lot of that information that's being shared, and our governments increasingly rely on them and depend on them for the security of our critical infrastructure. So these factors and elements are challenging traditional diplomacy as we know it, and the nation state perhaps is being challenged in its traditional role. So the question now is diplomacy unfit for technological change and now for this digital world? The fear is not new, as you can tell. These are the words of a British diplomat that you probably know or heard of. Why is that? Well, because as Arnaud actually once mentioned at an event, the internet economy obeys the principle of maybe move fast and break things, right? But that doesn't exactly apply to diplomacy. Digital diplomacy sounds like an unnatural kind of term. Politics online are not hierarchical. They're not unidirectional, they're not secret. You don't know who sends the message, you don't know who receives it. And control and secret is still a cherished tenet of diplomacy. Diplomacy works behind closed doors. Open government, open data doesn't seem to quite fit with that. So this control and secret aspect is going to be harder to maintain and achieve in an age where you have twittering bureaucrats, let's say. But I would want to see natural synergies between technology and diplomacy, though. It wouldn't be the first time diplomats had to adapt, and it wouldn't be the first time they would use technology to sort of protect their language, to protect some secrets. Think about the seals of authentication, mechanical cipher, Morse code, and now a modern encryption. And also, I've heard one French diplomat in Sweden say that it would be ironic to be shocked by a comparison between diplomat and a robot. Because after all, the way decision-making works for diplomats is quite robotic, quite analytical. It's about controlling the noise of human emotions. You recognize Cardinal de Richelieu, who was Louis XIII's minister during the 30th War, and he once made a decision that was outrageous from an ideological and religious point of view, but made perfect sense from the state interest point of view, which was to conclude an alliance between Catholic France and Protestant Sweden against Catholic Austria. And that was very much a decision made on, rationality, sort of making sure that you observe what matters in the end from a rational point of view. So there's this codification of diplomatic protocol to avoid overreaction or miscalculation. Another couple of examples would be how governments rotate their diplomats every 3 to 4 years, perhaps so that diplomats don't become too emotionally attached to the country they're based in. And maybe saying that a diplomat is passionate is not necessarily a compliment. So moving forward, what's important for diplomacy and foreign policy to keep in mind is that this shift is happening, so it's important to keep up, really. Diplomatic systems are already using AI to make decisions. In China, for example, they've developed with the Chinese Academy of Science. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is using a platform for prediction and environmental simulation that basically vets almost all foreign direct investments. Another reason why it's important to keep up is because WhatsApp, a lot of diplomats are using WhatsApp during key decision-making, voting processes, and negotiations. Also, as we're producing a lot more data, a lot of country data being produced, that will require increasingly computing power processes. So that's basically is inevitable in a way. Think also about how diplomats are, you're very good masterminds, but computers are beating us at AlphaGo and such strategic games. They're better than us at piloting our spacecrafts. Maybe they will even replace, or you can start to see that in meeting rooms, how leaders turn to their phone for advice. So it's no longer the whisper in the ear. It's the phone that suggests scenarios, that give real-time fact-checking, etc. Should we be scared, though? As you mentioned, that's often you hear this dystopian kind of discourse about technology. I want to see how, there are many opportunities to consider using technology in foreign policy and diplomacy. Well, you have the fact that AI acts as an equalizer between big and small countries. So small countries that maybe are understaffed could use technology to be able to deal with the information coming in. Malta, for instance, the permanent representation in Brussels, they have only one person to deal with all the Commission's proposals coming in, while other countries have 3. So if you can accelerate that and use technology to make sure that that one person can actually deal with everything on the same level as bigger country, that could be an important progress. It can also help with understaffing issues in that sense, and also employee turnover. A lot of people change positions and postings, so maybe a lot of that information is being lost. AI can be that institutional memory. It also is interesting to look at how in practice you can use AI as a tool to really cut through the time spent on research, analyze language, prepare input for diplomatic talks, so that more time can be spent by human diplomats on the human-centric aspects of negotiations, work that really requires human skills and human intuition. Micro-negotiators, for instance, are bots that could help running multiple rounds of negotiation ahead, compare that with each side, so each side would use its own micro-negotiator, and come up with a set of mutually agreeable offers so that you sort of accelerate the process of the decision-making. AI can also help in speech writing, in real-time translation, in multiple languages. You can use it as a verification tool. I've actually spoken to Debunk EU, so one of your startups that's doing an incredibly great job at this, because right now you operate in a world where there's a lot of information being shared that may not necessarily be true, so you need to have that power to fact check and detect influence networks as well. Also, it can build more engagement with the constituencies. You can, for instance, like North Carolina and Singapore, they're using bots to answer their citizens' questions in real time. So computer can do much faster some cumbersome tasks that human diplomats are doing now. So I see that as an opportunity in that respect. But it's important to raise a number of concerns. Again, there's the concern that the AI robot diplomat would replace the human diplomat, but I don't believe that's going to happen just because 21st century tools, as much as they're going to integrate our lives, we're going to be in a context where 21st century skills are also going to matter, and these are soft skills, these are personality, how you deal with people, and that's very much something that diplomats have to be good at. And if the machine takes over some of the mundane tasks, human diplomats can take care of the high politics processes. So I don't believe AI will replace, but rather assist. The bias is another problem, of course. There's a hope that AI will remove human error and personal egos, subjective factors like fear, which often are causes of escalation. However, there are fears that algorithms are fed by data sets that are generated by programmers, so human beings that have their own personality traits and their own bias. So it's a hotly contested topic within the computer science community, and we'll see how that develops. I think if you have high quality data sets, you can solve the problem partially. Also, another concern or obstacle to including technology in foreign policy and administration in general is that would require quite an upgrade. The technical expertise not necessarily there. You might have a problem of data sharing, so if you have incomplete data sets to share, you might have that issue of bias. There are also a lot of resource constraints that administration have to deal with. Resource, budget, political constraints. And also you have a lot of those people that are highly educated in digital skills and programmers that go to the private sector where they get higher salaries, for instance. There's also this very important question of confidentiality and data privacy and security. To what extent do you want to outsource public data and have it handled by an external company if you don't have the technical skills and need to outsource that? Now moving to finally, some of the things that can be done in practice, and I know Lithuania is already doing quite a lot, and I'm very impressed. So when I drafted those solutions, I mean, some of those you already are applying. I believe the traditional forms of diplomacy will remain, and they should remain. It will still be diplomatic cables, a bunch of people in suits in a room with flags in the background and a round table. Yes, but not all diplomacy should be like that just because the world is changing. So you can have government-to-government formal negotiation, but it also should be government to people, people to people, people to government, so that you can engage with a wider diversity of stakeholders to reflect the reality. And you can use 21st century tools for that, like AI, to empower rather than overpower. So what can be done, for instance, to ride this wave of digitalization in diplomacy and foreign policy? Set up innovation agendas for foreign policy with tech-based and cyber-active policy solutions. Engage with the business sectors. Treat them as partners. They can be really helpful if you trust them. They can trust you as well. They can create some tools, for instance, to help in reporting crime anonymously in some countries. A startup can create an application for that. Set up tech delegations. They've done that, I think, in the US. And also have a tech ambassador, like Denmark did. It was the first country to appoint one, Kasper Klinger, you probably heard of him. And that's more in the acknowledgement that you have to deal with companies, technology companies now have taken on such a role that it's important to include them and discuss with them, rather than saying the nation state doesn't matter. It's not what these guys are doing. It's more, let's integrate tech companies in this dialogue. Let's reinvent this partnership. Finally, there's a few more low-hanging fruits that can be done internally, such as giving those young digital natives a spot or a place at the grown-up tables. I'm not a digital native. I was actually not born late enough for that. I know people who are 20 years old and much better than me and tech savvy, and they will be. So it's important to have this acceptance internally in foreign policy and diplomatic services, to include them and to promote them faster. That's what they're attracted by. And also facilitate a transfer of best practices. Have tech savvy people from foreign policy move to other countries and share experiences that way. There's a lot more I wish to tell you, but I know that we have a full event, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion. But to conclude, I believe that AI can bring more efficiency, more fairness, and to bring you all closer to people and engage more. You have an opportunity to set an example on how to use AI the right way and lead that example. So the potential of your roles can truly be unlocked, and at the same time, you can be placed back at the core of engagement and citizenship, which is maybe something we're missing today in a more fragmented and polarized world. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Eline, for bridging between the two worlds, the tech world and the diplomatic world. The next speaker is Arnaud. Please.
Well, good morning to all, and thank you very much for inviting me to this exciting event. As a diplomat, you get to talk about a lot of things. It can be politics, it can be economy, and it can even be AI. So it's a wonderful job. I think most of you are doing that job. So you see we are at the center of the foremost evolution right now. A lot has been said, so what could I add? In fact, it's true. AI is based on techniques that were invented in the 1970s, then discarded because you deemed useless, then reused thanks to computing power. And in fact, some of these techniques have to do with optical character recognition. We had Belgian companies at the forefront of that technique itself that were bought by giant groups afterwards, but they were active in the 90s and in the early 2000s. So I think the reason why AI is so important right now and on the top of the mind of a lot of people is for two reasons. People envisage now an artificial general intelligence. So I reassure you, I'll be talking about artificial narrow intelligence, of focusing on narrow tasks that can still be fantastic. But everybody's focusing on that AGI, because it seems like the cornerstone of who is going to be in power in the next 30, 40, 50 years. Nobody knows when it's coming. But when you ask specialists, 50% of them think that artificial general intelligence is going to happen before 2040. So it's not that far away. Of course, we don't know, because in the 1970s, specialists said, give us 2 or 3 years and we'll have artificial intelligence. Didn't come about. So who knows? I'm not here to predict the future. I'm here to tell about what's going on right now. And one of the big debates right now is ethics in artificial intelligence. And if you think about artificial general intelligence, you may think about a robot, like I think my fellow panelist showed in the beginning. Well, this is not going to be artificial general intelligence. The way it moved ahead in the early 2000s was through the grid computing technology, where you put a lot of computers, supercomputers together, and there's a lot of exchange going on. And then you have novel approaches, novel data sharing, novel insights that you can get from them. And in fact, the internet is a huge grid economy, like it was said before as well. And the cloud computing everybody's talking about right now, it's just that, but squared. It's even more important. So if you take all that into account, ethics has to come to mind, because the way artificial intelligence has been developed right now is about optimizing things. Machine translation, let's optimize the result, the text you have. Well, that's fantastic. But what about lethal autonomous weapons? Do you want to optimize lethal autonomous weapons without regard to ethics? No, you don't want that. What about finding all resources, let's say diamonds, golds, or others, without regard to the environment? You don't want that either. So you have to put ethics back into the mix and go away from a purely optimizing view, which can be a computational view. So that's where philosophy comes into the equation. And that's the interesting about AI. It's computational, but it's also philosophical. And in fact, Alan Turing, and Alan Turing is considered to be one of the inventors of AI, but he's not the only one, has had this Turing, let's say, experiment, where you have one person in one room and then another entity, as it were, in another room, connecting through keyboards and input like a computer. And you could not, if you cannot tell that the other person or the other entity is an entity, another person, then the test has materialized. And in fact, today we have come to a lot of narrow intelligence, artificial narrow intelligence, where this Turing test has been passed. So intelligence, is it only human? Well, of course, we have some senses that a machine doesn't have. We have the sense of self. I'm here in this room. I can feel there's a camera on me. That's a sense that the machine would not have. But how can I say that my intelligence, my feelings are stronger or different than a machine? Well, actually, how do you define intelligence? Intelligence, an entity is intelligent to the extent that it does the right thing. That means that its actions are expected to achieve its objectives. So you have a lot of intelligent entities in this connected world. And when you see other regimes, in China, for instance, where you have face recognition, and face recognition can actually lend itself to automation and to artificial intelligence very well. Well, if you don't have the same ethical framework that we have, you can have a lot of success in that field. But do you have a society that embraces it? Maybe. I'm not a specialist of the Chinese society, but I know that for the European society, privacy, ethics is paramount. Why is that? Because we knew, and you are well placed to know it, we have known a Second World War. Some countries like yours have known also Soviet occupation. When I look at the KGB monument, KGB museum actually, not a monument, KGB museum here in Vilnius, I see names of resistance that have been killed by the Nazis. The Gestapo was there. But I see names also that were killed after 1945 because some other tortures happened there. So you keep that in mind and you say, yes, I want to have ethics based in my artificial intelligence. I want to have that built in, and I want to go away from an optimizing, purely optimizer engine. That's for artificial general intelligence. Now I'm going to talk about what I do every day, and that's more artificial narrow intelligence. And the basic of artificial narrow intelligence is just data structure. You cannot think about AI without thinking data. We, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium, used to work with paper documents. Very able clerks were updating the list of our diplomatic postings every year, because we have this movement that you know as well. Miss van Pieperzeel is not in Warsaw anymore, she is in Beijing. So you would change that. Then we had this revolution, it was PC, everybody was in Word. So they typed it in a Word document, but still, it's not really structured data. So a couple of years ago, what we did, we took all that information, and it's basic information, who's where, what's the phone number, what's the address, and put them in a structured database. Might seem like a common sense, but that structured database, if you do it correctly, you have structured data. It's very easy to do artificial narrow intelligence on structured data. Then you can actually have a portal, which is what we did. A portal, it looks like Facebook, it looks like any search engine you use every day, maybe every minute, and you can get the information you want on that portal. Well, that's fine, you say. I could get the information from a Word document. But what we did with data as well, we give different views to that portal. So we have what we call regional accountants. They're in charge of the accountancy of the embassy, very important, because we have, of course, a system of checks and balances. We have a Cour des Comptes who checks the accounts of the whole government, including every embassy. But we also have regional accountants that are in charge of several countries in a jurisdiction. I mean, like your country, we are not a big country, we don't have natural resources, so we have postings that are responsible for several countries. And sometimes some of the postings have 2 or 3 diplomats only. So that's where what Eline said comes into play as well. We can use solutions to actually work faster. But that accountant is going to select another view based on the same data structure, but have a completely different portal, because what interests her will be there on the portal. And that's the power of having data. Now, to have data and to build an AI on that, actually you need a team. And the team is going to be comprised of specialists, ICT people, and of people that are more aware of what IT people call the business. We're diplomats, it's not only business, it's politics as well, it has been said before. We want to be able to say, okay, you have this wonderful portal, that's great, it's based on open source, excellent. But we need a view for the accountants. The IT people will not know that. So I am working with these IT people in close relation, and we've been working together for 2 years. And we are actually developing more and more modules of that same data structure. So how does that change from the way we used to work? Well, perhaps some organizations and some parts of my organization still do that. You call a consultant. It can be McKinsey, it can be Deloitte, can be any of the big 4 or a more regional consultant. You say, we have a problem. Spend a month, 2 months, checks, comes up with a solution. You can buy that solution, you can have it done in-house. Software is there, it's finished. No, that's not the way it's going to work with AI. You need to think about everything that can be done, and that's a constant flow. And that's also the AI revolution, that's where education comes into play. We need a new education platform for people like you and I. We are not digital natives. We've grown up with Word, with Excel. We thought it was the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. And we know now Facebook and other platforms as well. We need to be trained to look into data, to think about insights. But our children need that as well. Do they need to be trained only in data, in coding? No, they don't. It might very well be that in 10 years coding is, for the most part, automatized. That's possible, automated. But they need to have a literacy in all these instruments so that they can play with it. Basically, it's kind of a playing attitude that you have to have towards data. And that also has implications for the hierarchy. The hierarchy can't expect to have, perfect solution in 2 months. And say, oh, you did a great job, let me put an excellent in your report. No, that's not the way it works. Perhaps an excellent insight is going to come, but it might take 4 months. Or you might work 2 months on something, and in the end drop it, because it didn't work. So you have to accept that it's going to be by trial and error that things come up. And that is in itself a whole organizational revolution almost. You cannot say, like you would for a note for a minister, oh, the note has to be ready by 15th of May, because the minister is going to New York from the 18th to the 21st. It's not going to work with that data you're going to do. But once in a while, you still have to put stringent deadlines, otherwise you're not achieving anything. But still, I just wanted to put that in mind. Now, where does AI come into play at the Belgian level, not at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Well, of course, we're very much aware that, like every country, we have our strong points, our weak points. And some of the strong points are, for us at least, pharmaceutical research, research and development, academic research, where actually we have the universities and other academic institutions working with the business sector. Sometimes an academic lab spins off and becomes a company. So we have that tradition, let's say, which is actually pretty much compatible with how AI works, because if a very competent academic does something for a Belgian company, then they can spin it off and it can become another specialized company. Now, I talked about education. We have a AI for Belgium. That's a platform a bit similar to the Lithuanian platform my co-panelist described. And they have people from academia, they have people from the public sector, they have people from the business, of course. And they thought about what was needed in Belgium to actually solidify this AI that we have. Like I mentioned, we had OCR companies in the 90s, so we're not going from zero, but still. They want to set up a new learning deal. I talked about that. They want to develop a responsible data strategy. So when you think about data strategy, you may refer to what I was saying before, structured data. But in the European context, you will also, of course, think about the general data privacy regulation, GDPR. A lot of people have said, okay, GDPR, it's a lousy regulation, it hampers innovation. At the same time, it's perfectly aligned with the ethical platform, these ethical guidelines I was telling you about, and why it's so important for Europe. So certainly it can become better for the time, but when you see that California is actually inspired by some of the provisions of GDPR to give more data privacy to their own state citizens, when you see that San Francisco, and I mean the big GAFA, or most of them are close to San Francisco, has banned facial recognition in the street cameras, then you realize that privacy and the European approach to privacy can actually be an example for the rest of the world, at least that side of the Atlantic. Then support private sector AI adoption. What does that mean? If you have a big company, and every country has a few big companies, no problem. They will invest millions in AI. They will do the necessary. But you have SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and we have a lot of those. You need to help them. And you help them through some large-scale events, some training programs, some social impact progress. It has to be also on the basis of open data, so you follow through on the open data platforms. The fourth pillar that they want to put through is innovate and radiate. What does that mean? You have a few startups, they have great ideas, maybe things nobody thought about in this artificial narrow intelligence fields. But then at one point, you want to scale it up. So they need, for this scaling up, they need large-scale collaboration, they need to work with academia, and they need the creation of a few sandboxes, actually. So that means that you have to have a whole AI scene, and I believe also you mentioned that, an AI scene in the country to have that come to fruition. Perhaps also an investment fund. Some of these companies don't have much funds, so if you have an investment fund that can help them to kickstart a few projects or a few scalabilities, they will be helped. And last but not least, especially in this audience, improve public service and boost the ecosystem. What do they say? What does AI for Belgium say? They say, okay, we need, from the public system, we need to move to a platform approach. That means that we need to think about needs for the government, in my case, the Belgian government. What do we need from AI? Do we need something for economic diplomacy or economic in itself? Well, you take economy, and then the MFA would use that for economic diplomacy. Ministry of Economy would use it for other statistical purposes. The Ministry of Energy would use it for something else. You have a platform approach, you open it up to everybody in the public sector. And you create the role of Chief Digital Officer, so that somebody can have a macro view of everything that's going on in Belgium, but also at the European level maybe, and also with the private sector, which includes big companies that are based in Lithuania or Belgium, but are not even Lithuanian or Belgian. You just make a huge community. And that community is important also on a literal level. You and I, people in the street, They're afraid of AI. They think it's going to steal their jobs. Well, artificial narrow intelligence would put approximately 18% of the jobs in danger in Belgium. Probably medium type jobs, some of them high salary jobs, because automation can do that. But at the same time, if you train the people, if you educate them, they will see that artificial narrow intelligence is actually a tool they can use to augment their reach and to actually become better at what they do. If you do that, you gain public adoption. And if you put back into the focus soft skills like teachers, like people helping for the elderly, for instance. I don't know what the age pyramid is in Lithuania, but the age pyramid in Belgium is clearly towards a lot of elderly people. Well, if you can have very human-centered and human-capable helpers, it will be much better and much better appreciated. So that's what I would say. I would finally say that at the ministry, we of course follow AI as well from the multilateral approach. So we're discussing, like all the other countries of the UN, about lethal and autonomous weapon systems. We're following also the European Union approach. We are part of this EU approach to AI, which identified 4 sectors and then 2 extra sectors. We very much embrace that. And then from an internal point of view, Belgian point of view, we are a decentralized state, so we have the region of Flanders, we have the region of Wallonia, and the region of Brussels. Each region, and 2 extra communities as well, French-speaking, German-speaking, have their own AI plan, which we integrated in that EU approach. And it very much develops on the strengths we have. So we want to have R&D in pharmaceutical aided by AI, augmented by AI. We want to have edge computing, which means AI on the chip rather than in the cloud. Well, yes, we want to be part of that as well. So it's a fascinating topic. There's a lot to be said, but this community aspect is central. At the level of the MFA, a lot can be done as well, but it requires a change of culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnaud, for a very useful overview of what's happening in Belgium. Now, Ossi, the floor is yours.
All right. So, first of all, I'm honored to address this audience. It's my first time in Lithuania, and I think I like the country a lot. My short intervention has 2 parts. First, I'm going to tell a bit about my government's overall approach to the AI during the past few years. And secondly, I'm going to provide a more specific outlook on how the Finnish MFA has been dealing with the AI. And in fact, there is not that much to brag about, as much of the ministry's efforts have concentrated on building understanding, networking with the expert communities, but also with some efforts to bringing our concerns and views to the international agenda. So by telling you about the Finnish experiences, my intention is to give you something against which to reflect your own countries and your own ministries' approaches to the AI. Okay, let's start with the government's approach. In some respects, Finland has been comparatively fast in responding to the rapid development of AI technologies. The initial reactions mainly reflected a concern for the international competitiveness of Finland. And only slowly other perspectives, especially security and ethics, have become more visible. So Finland is a small export-dependent country whose population, on the average, is quite highly educated. And traditionally, the most significant factor in the national economic growth has been the development of technology and also the ability to apply it in both private and public sectors. So Finland wants to be a high-tech society, and we are always concerned about our international competitiveness. So keeping this in mind, it's probably not a surprise that our national artificial intelligence program that was launched about 2.5 years ago was commissioned and at first pretty much also owned by the Ministry of Economic Affairs. None of the so-called security ministries, that is ministries for interior, foreign affairs and defense, were partners in the starting phase, or the starting stage of the program. The general aim of the program was, and it still is, to turn Finland into a leading country in the application of AI. Many countries have similar types of objectives, for sure. Broad use of AI is believed to improve the competitiveness of the Finnish businesses and industries. It is also believed to enhance the efficiency of the public sector. Also to contribute to the functioning of society and well-being of the citizens. So implementation of this program during the past 2 years has included concrete actions to enhance business competitiveness by use of AI, to promote effective use of data in all sectors, for example with the help of legislative changes, to develop AI training and education, and to attract startups from outside the EU to invest in Finland. Tens of millions euros have been invested through various instruments, and more is in the pipeline. So in the national strategic planning, the AI and its implications were initially framed in terms of innovation, productivity, employment, research and education. Recently, however, the goal has shifted from inducement of technological change to ethical and human-centered management of change. And perhaps the game changer has come about with the realization that security-oriented cyber and hybrid tracks could not and should not be kept separate from the more general discussions on national strategies towards technological progress. And today, it is also acknowledged that to be legitimately able to push a technology-driven innovation agenda, it's essential to take care of AI's ethical conduct, including safety, security, and legality. And as an example, just about a week ago, government commissioned a report mapping out the legal framework for using algorithmic decision-making in the public administration was published in Finland. Okay, what about the foreign ministry then? How has the MFA reacted to this AI hype? Well, quite similarly than the rest of society. The MFA initially looked at the AI from the perspectives of economic gains and productivity. On the one hand, the issue of AI was part of the innovation and foreign trade portfolio. On the other hand, the topic had come up in our research project concerning the future of diplomacy. So foreign ministry's work on the topic has been mostly intellectual. We have worked for increasing the knowledge base of the ministry staff and the leadership. We have strived to understand which aspects of technological development and management of its implications in the first place belong to the MFA portfolio. Also, if and when AI is so important for national competitiveness and well-being, even security, then it's quite important to know what your country's comparative standing in the international competition is. And so to do this, my government funded a research project which produced an overview on the volume and quality of academic research in different countries using bibliometric tools. And according to this study, Finland seems to be faring relatively well what comes to the academic research on AI. The authors of this study nevertheless recommended concentrating on certain niche areas, not to try and compete with the big players, which much more resources in the areas that they already dominate. So what about AI as a tool of foreign policy making? Well, we recently collaborated with the Diplo Foundation to find out how the proliferation of new data sources, the so-called big data, and AI technologies will affect our work in foreign ministries. And this study on big data indicated that there are real possibilities in putting the new data in better use by foreign ministries. And I guess Ms. Chivot made a pretty good overview on these applications. But the study also indicated that new data sources, they will not in the near future revolutionize the work of diplomats, as there are still many kinds of significant difficulties on the broader application of these data sources. But we know nevertheless that there are pioneering work in progress in a couple of European foreign ministries, and we are certainly keeping our eyes open also in Finland in this respect. In this February, Diplo published another report mapping AI's challenges and opportunities for the conduct of diplomacy. This report reviews applications most likely to bear relevance to diplomats. And according to this study, most promising AI solutions could come in the form of textual analysis. For example, to use algorithmic support in analyzing thousands of pages of international treaty texts, or tens of thousands in-house diplomatic reports. Okay. So, together with the attempts to increase our understanding, the Finnish MFA has also participated, even initiated, international, informal and formal negotiations aiming to shared understanding on the principles that govern the development, deployment and use of AI technologies generally and in more specific contexts. We have, for example, supported international debates concerning the linkages between new technologies and human rights. During the Finnish presidency of the Council of Europe this year, we organized a high-level expert conference in Helsinki to debate the impacts of AIs on human rights, democracy, and rule of law. And in addition, and just like many other countries, Finland's been active in the discussions concerning the lethal autonomous weapons systems in the confines of the CCW Convention. Also during the Finland's presidency in the Council of the European Union that actually began 9 days ago, we will also address digitalization and the AI from European defense point of view. And in this context, generation of a common awareness of relevant issues and, if possible, steps towards agreeing on some common policy lines would be a very good start. At the European level, it would be especially important to discuss and decide on the strategies by which European defense sector can keep up with the technological competition from the US and China. of course keeping in mind the blurring line between civil and military applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Ossi. I think that sets the framework for our further discussion. And well, we are a little bit behind our schedule, so I'll start immediately with the questions to the panelists, and we'll ask you to comment on those questions. Please keep your answers short and crisp. And the first question I wanted to raise is related to AI and geopolitics. So Bill Gates has said that AI is comparable to nuclear energy, both in danger and in promise. So United States has the lead with this technology, though it doesn't have an AI strategy at the government level. Chinese government has a very robust top-down strategy, and I think they are investing a lot of resources into both research and application. And then Russian President Putin is reported to have said that whoever establishes the monopoly in AI, that someone will rule the world. Is this run or competition between the AI global superpowers, is that something serious that the diplomats should be looking at? And is there a case for negotiating a multilateral framework, how to keep the AI development in check, comparable to nuclear energy development? And where is EU in this race? Eline, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for your question. To the question, are we serious about this global AI race? Yes, and especially one country is bloody serious. It's China. So they're not just playing catch up with the West, they're planning to basically leap over all these Western economies and really become a leader in AI by 2030. There are a few signals that are important to watch. They're allocating massive government funding to AI companies, literally helping those big champions like Tencent and Alibaba or Baidu to progress in a digital economy. And 85% of their businesses are have adopted or are pilot testing AI, compared to perhaps not even 50% of French and German businesses. They're publishing more AI patents. They're increasingly invited to AI conferences, so their representation at the global scale is much more taken seriously. And they've secured about 40% of global investment in AI startups, compared to about 38% in the US. So you can easily see that the EU doesn't get the lion's share. So where is the EU in all that, to address another part of your question? Well, when we'll have Brexit, it will happen. We'll only have 5% of AI startups in the world. Right now we have about 11%. So we're not, we haven't, our position in this is not necessarily secure in terms of innovation. Private investment, we're getting 5.5 times less than the US. The US get about 21 billion for North America, actually not just the US. Asia gets about 11 billion. We get a little bit more than 3.5 billion. Another problem is that a few of our companies are digitalized. We have a lot of SMEs that haven't integrated big data analytics in their businesses. But we do have a few assets, and maybe we'll discuss that later, but we do have a talent pool, we do have great research facilities, we have a strong industry, so there are a few things that are encouraging in the way through. I'll keep it to that.
You have your mics. Yeah.
Oh,
you have the mics.
So it's me. Yeah, I agree fully what you said. I could elaborate a bit on the research part of this AI competition, because according to the study that I referred to, the situation does not look that dire in the academic research front for Europe, because the European countries, when all the academic publications are put together, they do surpass academic research publications on AI made in USA and China. So in this sense, Europe is very relevant. Secondly, I also think that this race for AI supremacy, especially between USA and China, is real. The level of AI know-how is top-notch in both countries. That's certain. But we ought to keep in mind one thing. Although there most likely is a link between a country's AI know-how and its international position, we do not actually know how strongly AI standing will correlate with these countries' political and military power. Most analysts would probably agree that AI can work as a national power amplifier, but we do not yet know if the new technologies, whether they will benefit more in relative terms those countries with less power resources or those who already hold the leading positions in technological innovation. So whether AI revolution actually benefits more the underdogs or those who dominate, we don't know, or at least I don't know. Nevertheless, in the short term, I do not believe that AI or converging technologies will develop so fast as to dramatically alter the existing power relations or military balance between the superpowers.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for the question. It's indeed, and I like the quote from Bill Gates speaking about AI and about nuclear security, because actually for both instances you need to have a very robust cybersecurity. That's something that needs to be, let's say, at the base level if you want to develop AI. And that's, as part of geopolitics, I think that you shouldn't forget that, because we've seen in the field of cybersecurity some attacks, deliberate attacks lately, which were a new development as far as war acts are concerned. For the rest, I think I mentioned in my intervention the link between the European approach and what we've been through historically. I stand by that. Yeah, that's basically my point.
Well, so not to be, making this panel boring because everyone agrees on, so I'll be the opposite then, saying that, hey, although I'm a techie guy, I don't think AI is going, to blow this world. I mean, like 2 years ago, we've been talking exactly the same on the blockchain. I mean, the blockchain was, it will change the world. You don't need intermediaries. Now we will run out of the governments, and this is going to be a fantastic future. Now, 2 years after, we talk about AI the same. I mean, I think there is a little bit too much hype on this, because honestly, as I was trying, to push really on this, that this is just a piece of software. I mean, it's not, something now changes the world, absolutely. I mean, yes, we will have a lot of benefit out of it, but I should say it's not that dramatic, right? And in 2 years, we'll be talking about the computing power, like quantum computing, and this will change the landscape again. So it's going to be changing, and we are going to freaking out because all those technologies are so all of a sudden become important. Now, on the Bill Gates, he says this is a nuclear power and this is going to be so important. And I would say, hey, you are outdated, Mr. Gates, because now a green energy is a superpower, right? So I think AI in the future, it might also be, so to speak, irrelevant at the levels we're talking now today. So it's going to be somewhere in the background. It's going to be just like electricity, and we won't be debating about this that much.
Thank you very much. The next question is about ethics, and I think that featured in all of your presentations, initial presentations. So EU is putting a lot of emphasis on ethics. Huh? There's an ethics code that has been published by the EU Commission, right? And then at the company level, businesses, in, let's say in the Western world, are probably going even more granular and sort of self-demanding in their internal regulation. While in other parts of the world, like China, we see that the move is in the sort of opposite direction. They are using face recognition and going to great lengths with that. And I think in other parts of the world there will also be this approach that invent first and consider the consequences after. Aren't democracies losing the competitive edge here with sort of so demanding and self-imposing rules? Who wants to start?
Actually, yes, because I think it's a nice transition with what you just said. The fact that AI is not maybe a silver bullet and that we should probably demystify it. Yet, when we're talking about such multilateral frameworks, potentially about ethics, we're making it bigger than it actually is. Like this IPCC for climate change is now, there's going to be this project between Canada and France for an IPAI. It's like an intergovernmental panel on AI. There's no intergovernmental panel on the internet because it became part of our lives. So it's just a little remark. And then circling back to what you just mentioned, I think ethics and the use of that technology is important to discuss for us as Europeans in particular. It's part of our DNA to get into those conversations. When, Asians are, there's a new technology coming up, Asians are going to reverse engineer it, the Americans are making money with it, and we're fighting about it. That's what we do, and it's fair enough, and I think that's important. However, we shouldn't get sidetracked with those discussions. When we talk about trustworthy AI or ethical AI, it means that the scrutiny is basically on the machine, on the technology, when it should actually be more about corporate ethics. For instance, Volkswagen with the diesel emissions scandal, the problem was the corporate culture that led to the cheating on the customers. So I think, yes, just to keep it rather short, the EU is right to have those discussions, it's important, but perhaps from a competitiveness point of view, maybe we're missing a train here because we're focusing too much on let's be a referee rather than, but if you cannot be a referee if technology doesn't happen on your territory and if you don't know how to play the game. And yes, consumers may want to have ethical products, but what they also want is high quality and cheap products. And that remains to be seen whether that we will manage to achieve that. Just to finish, the European Commission has launched a piloting phase for companies to test a number of ethical requirements for their AI systems. They have 6 months to provide their feedback. I'm very curious to see how in practice ethical requirements can work for AI. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just contribute to what Eline just said. I mean, we are here like inventing a new type of vehicle, right? And we don't have this vehicle yet, but we say whether or not that vehicle will kill people. I mean, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's not the vehicle who kills the people, right? That's just like with those famous definition where bullets do not kill people, but people kill people, right? So it's the purpose how we are going to use it. I mean, AI by itself, it won't be destroying everything. It's a matter of quality, of standards, on the agreements, on the transparency, if we can check those codes or not. I mean, where we can get into the trap, what just happened with many other products, where we've been putting so much requirements on the, for example, materials used, like for printers or the solar panels, that we were saying, no, I mean, we in Europe, we care about this and this, you cannot use this particular material in producing printers. So what happened? I mean, not a single printer produced in EU since then. So this might happen with artificial intelligence if we will put too many, so to speak, irrelevant restrictions, then we won't be having, this vehicle in this region. So I would say we should be really, it's good that we put those questions up because these are relevant for everyone, not just IT, not just AI, but we just trying to define what is our lifestyle that we want to protect. And this is great because this will apply crossover the sectors.
Thank you. Speaking of vehicles, I'd like to focus on the explainability and transparency of AI, because I don't know if you followed that. A number of months ago, there was an accident between a Tesla that was put on autopilot and a robot crossing the street at CES in Las Vegas. So I'm wondering, okay, that's really an AI world or a kind of a utopian world we're living in. But the day we are having 10%, 20% of autonomous vehicles on the streets, and there's an accident happening, and a lady or a man or a young child is injured, who is responsible? Is it the AI? Is it the company behind the AI? Is it the driver who was on autonomous driving? I mean, this will have to be settled by a judge. And we will need some form of explainability. So I think in the vast debate on ethics and AI, that's a part that should not be forgotten. And then as far as narrow AI is concerned, you're right, there's a lot of hype on AI. And as far as the MFA in Belgium is concerned, we focused on a chatbot to help people with consular demands in our diplomatic postings. So that's based on open source consular code. There's no ethics there. It's purely a text-based analysis. It works very well. And we did an experiment at our UN team where, you know, we're part of the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member. We've been part of that since 1st of January of this year. Of course, we don't have such a big team as Germany or France, for instance, and we need to draft resolutions. We have the presidency of a few groups. So we used an AI engine to help draft resolutions that were more likely to be adopted. Then, of course, the diplomat has to negotiate, but you go from 5 rounds of documents to 2 rounds of documents, and maybe you don't finish at 4 in the morning, but at 12 at night.
Yeah, so I agree with all of you, but I would still like to emphasize the risk aspect. It's not the technology that is the problem, it's the users, that's true. It's certainly true that many authoritarian states will try to use and are using the technologies as tools for surveillance and repression of dissidents. And more than one ways, China is a case of point. In slightly milder forms, in legally more regulated forms, also many liberal democracies will be tempted to push the limits of ethically sound use of the new tech. They can do so in the name of security, they can do so in the name of productivity and economic growth, or they can do so by accident. In situations where new applications are adopted too fast or without sufficient testing. And companies whose profit and survival is dependent on constantly pushing new innovations to the markets are even more prone to neglecting ethical conduct. This is what we have seen in the case of Facebook, for example. Okay, these unethical cases of unethical use, they can be unintended, but they may still have detrimental consequences of the society. Facebook, for sure, they did undoubtedly not intend to serve as some kind of a vehicle for democratic interference, but they did, because the company grossly underestimated the socio-political significance of its technology in the 2016 US elections. Thanks.
Thank you. For the next question, we have a video address by President Obama. But before that, I want to remind the audience to get their questions ready and wave their hands so that I can see them. Okay, I can see like 3-4 questions already prepared. Okay, let's go.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right. Or Ben Carson is in the sunken place. Or, how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
Okay, so this time ethical questions are completely on me, if there are any. But
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make...
I'm sorry. But the question is, how do we go forward? And what's the strategy to curb deep fake like this, or fake news in general? Should there be a burden put on the businesses, like Facebook was mentioned already? Or is it a government policy and government responsibility?
I'm happy to take this one. Let's also not forget that the technology behind deepfakes is super, super important and does incredible things in the medical world. It's called GAN, that's the technology behind it. So it's important to keep using it and to make sure that it's trained with good quality data sets. But I'm not a tech person, but at least, that's one thing that's maybe not much discussed. Regarding the framework to use, what I see in my work is that having the burden on one or the other is definitely not the way to go about something that is extremely difficult to solve. The platforms, including Facebook, Google, they shouldn't be the judge and jury of what the truth is, especially when that content is generated by their own users. It should also not be the governments, because they're not neutral data brokers. A number of countries have attempted to pass some laws against fake news or hate speech online, and we see that there's a disconnect between the reality and what's imposed on the platforms. For instance, in some cases you have maybe 24 hours to take down harmful content, which for big platforms sometimes even aspirational. They can't always do that easily. And for smaller platforms, and we do have a few in Europe, that's almost impossible. Another thing that we see in those laws, and that's the case in Singapore, for example, the government, not even judges, are the ones that can say, well, whatever that content is about, it is saying something against our institutions, so that should go down. And this is a little bit of vague language, and that really is threatening freedom of speech. So I think it's really a solution lies in concerted efforts between governments and industry, those that know the technology, the developers and NGOs, to really figure out how to go about this. And I know that there's some skeptical perspectives on that, because the European Commission has done that with a code of practice on disinformation, working with big platforms trying to solve this. I think it's a better way to go about it, but of course there's disagreement in the community, so I'll keep it to that.
Another way to go forward is less technological. In all scenarios, it could be important to guarantee as high level of average education to citizens as possible. And it would be good to ensure sufficient media literacy skills for all age groups, not only for children, but also for more aged people. And it would also probably be helpful if public authorities were as transparent and open in their communication as possible. Because if the authorities do not communicate their or the reasons behind their judgments and decisions clearly and without delay, it offers a platform for all kinds of conspiracy theories and uncertainties. But even though I think that these are important measures that states can do, they probably won't solve the issue altogether. I just read about the research in which it was argued, or the outcome was that even the highly educated people and people with high cognitive skills, that is smart people, they, not me, they are very susceptible to believing incorrect information if that information is repeated constantly. And even the so-called fact-checking may work against its own objectives if the fact-checkers keep repeating these incorrect arguments. So this is a pretty tough situation.
Yes, I would like to throw two elements in the discussion. First of all, there have never been as many people paying for news as today. And that's probably because you don't know what you're seeing on Facebook. Some of it may be just black or white, and social media loves black or white, doesn't like the gray zone, whereas in a paid newspaper, whether it's Finnish, Belgian, American, whatever, then if you choose your source carefully, you are expected, you trust that it will be a gray area and will be good information. Then we've been talking about Facebook a lot, but you have to remember that Facebook used to be pictured very positively in the media during the Barack Obama election, because he actually used Facebook to win against many expectations. Same thing with the Arab Spring. Now, of course, people have realized that this is a tool that can be abused, and some foreign powers have actually, and it's been demonstrated, abused Facebook to change the course of elections. There's a lot to be said about that. There's, in fact, some form of social engineering with these platforms. I was posted in India before, and in fact, in India, Facebook was criticized for enticing what they call communal violence, basically violence between religious communities. And WhatsApp, which is part of the Facebook group, actually implemented a measure that makes it impossible to forward videos that have been demonstrated as false, such as, for instance, such a video. So people receive it, but cannot forward it. So there are technical solutions as well. One could think about a diverging point of view in the left part of your screen while you're seeing something black or white. And that could be perhaps also experimented.
Well, I think we are going right to the spot with this question. And this is exactly where Europe have to play. So myself, I work for government, so I see much more than it's visible on media. So before, I was, of course, so much relying on what I see on media to judge the government. So now, when I'm in the other side of the wall, I see that the media is also, like, sometimes a very one big fake news, because we are just posting one of the opinions. And this example, I mean, to me, is just a brilliant usage of AI technology to demonstrate what can be achieved. And so whenever we have conversations like this, we always came to the same conclusion. It's all about the education system. And education, not the youngsters, but the whole population. So there is one common characteristic for the people is critical thinking. So, right, and the more you are educated, the more you tend to challenge what you see around yourself. So this is definitely the way to proceed. And I'm very much advocating not about the digital skills like everyone is pushing, but the digital intelligence. Because it's not about learning how to program, but basically how to navigate yourself in this digital world. Do you understand your identity digitally? Do you understand, emotions digitally? Do you know how to control your reputation digitally? So these are many, many components that you have to learn to live in the digital world. So we have to focus on emotional intelligence, communicating with the people, but also digital intelligence in actually growing the, so to speak, awareness of our population. So what do we do in government for this specific problem? We have a project. And this project is fantastic. We are building a new information system where we will just post, those fake news address. And this is how we improve, the resilience of our society. And I think this is a big waste of money. Because, I mean, just by registering, the site address, it doesn't make us, resilient to those type of news. It's criticism to myself, actually, because I tried, to stop that program, but it runs so fast on the rails that it's impossible to do so. Anyway, in concluding on this particular subject, what I wanted to say, we see many changing paradigms with the digitization. One of them, we have exactly the same problem in cybersecurity. How do we trust, the entities one from the other? It's so hard to identify the citizens behind this. So there is one new concept which is emerging. It means trust no one. In other words, by default, you do not trust anyone. Those sources, they have to prove themselves that they're trusted, sources for information. Because now we are in opposite. Whatever we see or we read, we think that this is true by default. So I think we have to change it into the way that we do not trust anyone, and the sources, they have to prove themselves being trusted source of information. So this is one. And this is how it comes back to the EU with this ethical guidelines, and it's not the data, the new oil. The trust is the new oil. And I think in EU we know that very well, how to trust each other, nations, neighbors, people, and in the future, this is going to be one of the key success elements. How can we build the trustful ecosystem around us? Because otherwise, they will be, always scared, they will be always protected, and they will be having problems. And I think China will run into this very soon when the people start not trusting their government with this AI use of face recognition and social scoring, and they will be in the big problem. And I think with our way, we will get into this trust as the new oil. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I registered some 5 questions in the room, so I think we will start taking those questions. And surprise, surprise, the first question is coming from Lithuanian ambassador to China.
Thank you so much, and it was really very interesting to hear what you think about artificial intelligence and what we do about it, because I had many chances to participate in similar conferences in China and to hear what they are doing. And actually they're using this tool everywhere, even for diplomacy as well. For example, in many conferences they use already robots to translate on the screen when they speak. They don't need real interpreters anymore. They also have a tool that reads in 2 hours, translates and summarizes media information on China from everywhere in the world, including regional media. They do a lot, and they are very serious about it. And the quote from Bill Gates was very right and very true. My question is, I heard an interview on CNN where American researchers and developers of artificial intelligence were complaining that while China is very free to collect data, big numbers of data, and to analyze it freely, and they are going much faster, and US with regulations, rules, and ethics cannot cope with it because it's literally impossible. And they told that it's like 1 or 2 years difference already, because simply that's the burden they have, because they need to comply with regulations. And the most scary thing for me was when I heard at Tsinghua University, one of the leading universities in China, when the professor working with artificial intelligence and developing the different tools said that in some not that far future, artificial intelligence will be in hands of several very few and very rich people in human China. So what is our strategy to deal with this? Because I didn't hear it today. I saw that we speak about ethics, that you understand that there is discrepancy between Chinese and Western regulations. And our colleague from Finland, he said that Western countries might move a little bit forward or might move a little bit away of our ethical standards. But do we have a strategy to deal with that? Thank you.
I can take the first response, if that's all right. So we do have a strategy. What does AI need to develop and to be used competitively by businesses? It needs data, a lot of data. It needs infrastructure. It needs research. It needs skills. It is true that if China is ahead already, if it's on one particular thing, actually a couple of particular things, which is AI adoption and just the access to data, because they have this huge population and they have less limitation on how to collect that data, especially personal data, which can build a lot of powerful commercial applications for AI. Very rightly so. So we do have a strategy, which is an overall one that's put in place by the Commission, and a number of countries and member states in the EU have already adopted their national AI strategies to look at their own assets and what can they, share and put in common, integrate, for instance, digital innovation hubs to make sure that our research power is best used across countries, how to attract private investment, how to digitalize our public sector services so that we generate more data. That's also one of the things that we can do. There are a number of things. I don't want to enter too much into detail because perhaps my fellow panelists here will. However, one thing you pointed out that I'd like to react on is the regulation that we have that may be standing in the way. And it's true that we see with the GDPR that this particular law has been drafted when it was about big data and not so much AI, although it does apply to automated systems. And a number of businesses are really, I'm trying to stay polite, they can see how it may be in a way of their innovations and their ability to collect data and to produce more powerful AI applications. So yes, we have less population than China, and we have limited the access and the processing of some of that data. So in my work, one of the arguments we're trying to make is that it would be important to look again at the GDPR and to amend some of the little bits and pieces that are standing in the way for us to become more competitive with AI. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I could go on, but I think it's polite to share the floor.
Yeah. I don't think that we are doing these ethical regulations or guidelines in vain. And I don't think that we are doing them only for ourselves, the Europeans, but because the norms, the principles, ethics, they do tend to diffuse. And Mr. Gaspart mentioned the GDPR. That's a good case because when the regulation was on the planning table, when it hadn't yet been initiated, the third countries received it pretty skeptically. Some were even pretty hostile. But once it has been implemented, we can now see that many regions, many countries are taking these guidelines as some kind of standard which they are trying to copy, and they are trying to adopt their own practices and norms into the EU regulation. Because they see that the establishment and ensuring sustaining social trust is important for the companies, and they also see that it makes much easier for cross-border interaction, trade, transfer of data, and I don't believe that this caving into these regional blocks will last. It may work for some countries, for a short period, but in the longer time scale, I think that open system that includes as many countries and regions will be the best one.
Thank you, and thank you for your question, Ms. Ambassador. Very interesting point of view of how things evolve in China. I was posted in Guangzhou before being posted in India, so that was before the big data revolution, but I still saw how the Chinese function. And it's a very top-down approach. So at the government level, at the legislative level, it's really, the decision has to come from the top in Beijing, and then it seeps down towards every province. And what you mentioned about some people having access to AI and having, let's say, access to the water of AI, well, I think that's compatible with that vision. But on the other hand, here in Europe, we have another way of looking at things. It's like the death penalty. Some people, some countries have the death penalty, we don't, so we have to adapt. And that's all about ethical. Now, of course, it doesn't mean we should fall behind in AI. And we have to remember that in Europe, in the European Union, we are the leaders as far as industrial data machine learning is concerned. So industrial data machine learning, that's something that can go pretty well ethically. There will be some particular cases where you have to take into account what you are making with that thing, but from a general point of view, that can be used, and that can be used to further AI analysis and AI products. I know also of some universities that use their students, so of course it's not going to be millions of people, not even billions, but you may have a few thousands of faces being used by an algorithm, and actually it can be pretty effective as well. So we have to use these constraints to function. As far as China and Europe is concerned. I had another point I wanted to make, but it escapes me now.
Yeah, well, I'm also with this position. I mean, it's not, game over. Also, for many, many reasons. So we have a strategy, but I'm not a big fan of the strategy because we have in this country hundreds of strategies. All of them are, this country is the best in the world, right? But then in reality, it somehow, it doesn't go that well. So in EU, we also have the greatest region in the world on AI, but I don't think we will make it that easy because the question how is more important than what. So this how question, if we deconstruct what's the competition, what's the market. So we have business to business, consumer to consumer, consumer to business, and then government to consumer. So many segments, right? And then we have software and we have hardware. So we have like at least 8 different components. So yes, consumers to business, this is exactly what China is leading. But then if you take business to business, especially hardware side, I mean, we in EU, we are the best in the world. I mean, maybe in this country we do not have, the big automotive industry, but then if you look France and Germany, we are the leaders in many segments. We might be failing some, but these are not, that the game is lost.
I just remembered my last point I wanted to make. The big data and the AI just came to fruition as well and was very visible for a number of people through a famous web shop, where you would get book recommendations that you didn't even know existed, but that were tailor-made to your tastes. And if you have an algorithm that says 90% chance Mr. Arnaud Gaspart will like this book, well, that's great. But then if you have a government that uses a similar algorithm and that says 90% chance Mr. Arnaud Gaspart is going to be a criminal in a couple of weeks, that's another question. And that shows the debate of ethics and AI. You should be careful with that.
Okay, thank you very much. We have the next question here.
So, thank you for arranging this meeting, and thank you for possibility to speak in this meeting. Really, I have the impression that many of my colleagues do not understand what means artificial intelligence. What is the artificial intelligence system? What is not artificial intelligence system? So, and I thank you for panelists for your representation, but the most thing you spoke about was not an artificial intelligence system. It was about computerization. It was about the office use. It was some kind of softwares and so on. So do you think that automatic translation, machine translation is artificial intelligence system? I don't think so. Do you think that music creation system programs are artificial intelligence system? I think no. So therefore we must define what means the artificial intelligence system, and after that we can speak about that. Usually covers, so maybe my colleagues knows me very well, as I'm one of the founding members of the ministry, as well as I'm also the signatory of the Act of Independence. But before that, I was a scientist worker, and I worked in the 30 years ago in the field of artificial intelligence at that time. So totally, perhaps there are two main areas which really belong to artificial intelligence. The first one is the artificial neural networks. So what it is, usually when we think about solving some problems, we have the input data, and we must receive some replies, some outcome from the system. As you know very well, maybe I will explain in Lithuanian, if you agree. Kai mes turime dirbtinius neuroninius tinklus, tai juos sudaro, mes turime įėjimą į tuos neuroninius tinklus ir išėjimą. Paprastai tai sprendžiami tokie uždaviniai, kaip atpažinti kažkokius objektus, surasti ryšį tarp objektų ir taip toliau. Įėjimo duomenys dažniausiai būna kažkokie tai duomenys, sakykime, piešiniai, skaičių sekos ar dar kažkas. Ir sprendžiamas uždavinys tokio tipo dabar yra populiarus, sakykime, okay. So it is artificial neural networks. It is very now widespread and business-like system. And the other system is expert system, which really modelize the behavior of the intelligence subject. So therefore, many of things that you spoke do not have any relevance to artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the question is, if anybody has a quick definition of artificial intelligence, but really quick one. Any definition?
Yeah, sure. Basically, it's a machine able to learn by itself that's not being programmed to output B from A, but that finds the correlation itself. And sometimes you get results that have not been actually thought of by the creator of that neural network. But just to be clear, the last example I gave about 90% chance of you liking a book, it's a deep learning, it's a neural network. So I think we mentioned a few examples that are precisely on that.
Thank you very much. It's a really interesting presentation, and especially appreciated as being one in Lithuania. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Lithuania's ambassador at UNESCO. And UNESCO usually is, especially in Lithuania, recognized as a heritage institution. Meanwhile, it works in 5 sectors. Of those, 3 are science sectors, humanities, hard science, let's say, and communication and information. And in UNESCO, now topic 1 is artificial intelligence. And especially ethical principles of artificial intelligence. And what differs UNESCO from OECD, which we spoke about some organizations and much more regional organizations as OECD and European Union that also taking on artificial intelligence and some ethical principles. Interest of UNESCO, we have China, but we do not have United States, in difference from OECD, that already gives very interesting world outlook too. And now China's influence and China's interest is enormous. Since UNESCO, well, UNESCO mostly is for creating global criteria. And that interest definitely is there. But what we see in UNESCO very clearly, and that's exactly also what my colleague Ina from China was talking, a question of data. Data is crucial and will be even more crucial, but also for real use of, because what we see in UNESCO, China goes in two ways. It's very interested in defining criteria, and in last sessions, exactly of UNESCO Executive Board, we saw a number of countries from the region where China's influence is very heavy, mostly from Africa, almost total, I would say there, criticizing, because UNESCO already commissioned a kind of paper on ethics. So first critic was, it's mostly done by white people, to say very simply. I mean, it's regionally restricted, and therefore it's not acceptable. So definitely, use of term human rights is not acceptable. That's even why we're talking not about, rights-based, but ethic-based. Ethics is a very, very, very unclear term if you're talking about setting criteria and everything. So one thing, thinking, and another thing, what is very, very obvious, China is very connected, those are two ways, in commercial success. They already positioning themselves as next commercial power in artificial intelligence in the world. And let's remember about China two things. Its number, that means pure number of China population, but also cheap production and applicable in various regions of the world. So data has to be culturally diverse. And that's what China is working on, cultural diversity of data that it collects from region, and we're talking about Asia and about Africa, and also Eastern Europe, where Chinese products and everything coming very far. So this is my observation. And my question to our Vice Minister. In your strategy, and one issue that China is extremely interested and trying to lead is artificial intelligence in education. They just had a very big conference. They tried to make it political. It didn't happen. It was expert conference on education and artificial intelligence. Lithuania there was not represented by one single person. And in your strategy, there is no artificial intelligence in education, because our Ministry of Education is absent from it totally. So that's what I can say about development of artificial intelligence in Lithuania. Thank you very much.
Really thanks for this great observation on what's happening. And you are right on the pain point. We as a country, we tend to have a history on failing in many, many areas, not just education, right? But then on the other hand, we have a huge strength. So like, for example, we do send our best athletes to Olympic Games to win medals. So we do have the best diplomats to send all over the world to win, this new artificial intelligence race. So that's why I would emphasize a lot, not on a Ministry of Education, not just a single Ministry of Economy and Innovation, but to our society as a whole, and including yourself. I mean, so then I start talking about technologies, I always say, hey, forget technologies, it's not about them, it's about us. Do we embrace the future? Do we take the leadership to lead this? And I'm absolutely, amazed that we have UNESCO ambassador who is able to speak about AI topics and understand the relevance. No, but this is a big thing, because next time, this is where, the true inspiration comes from. So I'm really glad that we had this conference and we had the best of us being spread around the world, and hopefully this turns out into the leadership, not only the country, but the EU as such.
Rytis Pulauskas, I'm Director of Communications, and we do work a lot already with data analysis in order to better profile the certain audiences. My question would be for the Belgian and also the Finnish colleagues, very much on the practical side of sort of how to move sort of in the pragmatic way the systems. Could you give the best examples of the voice-based communication which uses artificial intelligence? And the second aspect also, how much resources we would need to basically to start the rather preliminary programs, for example, the open source analysis, or the ability to analyze the certain information for the negotiations to find the best negotiated alternatives for that. What are resources needed? Where do you train the people, and how many of them you would think we need to?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. So in fact, you can either develop things in-house or you can buy products that are available on the market. But the thing with AI is that you're buying actually time that you can use an AI engine. So basically you'd have to do an open procedure and check who's the cheapest and you know, put your requirements in some kind of a cahier des charges, we say in French. I'm sure you have a procedure that's pretty similar in Lithuania. It's about good spending, basically. But once you have that engine, what are you going to do as a diplomat? You need to open up to the either civil society or some students of IT or your IT department, and they need to play with the possibilities of that engine to tweak it in a way that will make it work with, let's say, the UN regulations, like I mentioned, or for the chatbot with our consular code that's available online. So it's a lot of tweaking. Some of it has to do with natural language processing as well. A chatbot will be more successful if you don't feel that it's a chatbot, but if you feel that it's kind of human-like. That's, you know, a lot of work creeps into that. As far as resources are concerned, it depends on the price you get from that engine. For the first example, the chatbot, we didn't buy any solution on the market. We actually created it from open standards, so that's, you have to take into account the number of man-hours needed to actually make it work, and you have to reason in trimesters. I mean, it's going to be at least 6 months to do a chatbot, at least for us, because we didn't have any experience with that. Then, of course, you have scalability. Once you do one project, the next one is going to be easier, and so forth and so forth. As far as your first question is concerned, I'm not sure I understood correctly. The voice-based system, what do you mean?
Voice-based communication. Well, we already have Siri, we already have the Alexis, so there are a number of questions which can be
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Because we have teleconference systems and so forth, but we don't use neither Alexa nor Google nor Siri for that kind of thing, because we're not sure where the data is going. On the other hand, you know, we have select, let's say, levels of security in our systems. You have the mail system, then we have another system that's compatible with NATO, and that's more secure. And then we have an encrypted chat app that we can use on the phones, and that we use for some communication that's actually better encrypted than our own mail system. So we do that, but we don't use voice-based, except for your own personal information if you want to, but not for diplomatic matters.
Just one more small addition. You were asking about possibilities for open source data analysis, and I think that there are lots of challenges for doing that in a relevant way. So for a small MFA, I would recommend starting for improving the data analytics in-house and in-house reporting. That's probably much more relevant for the organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. So with this, we will round up our panel. I think that was a very exciting discussion. And to finish it, I want to quote one computer scientist who happens also to be a comedian in the United States, and she said that she agrees with all experts warning us that someday AI will surpass human intelligence, but then she says, but I think it doesn't happen only because AI is getting better. With that, thank you very much for your attention and for the questions. Yeah, and thank you for the panel.